environment, including the political, legislative, and regulatory framework. Section 1. Discuss the pros and cons of FDI in multi-brand retail sector and examine its consequence on the food processing industry in India. Hints. FDI, foreign direct investment. FDI is an investment made by a company or individual in one country in business interests in another country, in the form of either setting up business operations or acquiring business assets in the other country, such as ownership or controlling interest in a foreign company. Multi-brand retail. While the government of India has also not clearly defined the term multi-brand retail, FDI in multi-brand retail generally refers to selling multiple brands under one roof. The current foreign direct investment policy permits overseas players to hold 51% stake in an Indian retail company. Pros. Serves as an aid to make investments which would yield long-term profits. FDI, apart from its capital benefits, also helps in reducing unemployment as it increases job opportunities for the people. It would lead to an exchange of skill sets and technologies and much better production levels. Farmers. FDI will also benefit the farmers in India, as the multi-brand retailers who will operate here will be purchasing the goods directly from the farmers, which means that the demand will rise and farmers will be able to sell their products at better and fairer price. Farmers and small producers will benefit in the long run from better prices for their products and produce biggest benefit which the Indian economy will gain if this FDI is completed is that of cash infusion. The FDI norms suggest that 50% of the 100 million capitals will go back to the back-end infrastructure, which means the FDI of 2.5 billion. 2 hints. Indian economy. Allowing international retailers which have already set up wholesale operations in the country to set up multi-brand retail stores will assist in keeping food and commodity prices under control. FDI in multi-brand retail would also help narrow the current account deficit. Given their professional approach, organized retailers will allot some quantity of resources towards the training and development of the resources they employ. With a mere 7% of the market, organized retailers are unlikely to drive kiranas out of business. The presence of foreign retailers through joint ventures and other means could speed up the process of transforming India's retail trade. Consumers receive higher quality products at lower prices, along with better service. Cons. Small retailers will lose their market, especially the unorganized retail sector, which comprise of the local kirana stores. Monopolization of the domestic market by large international retail giants. FDI in food processing industry. Recently, in the government's latest liberalization policy, it allowed 100% overseas capital in processed food retailing. Paves the way for retailers such as Walmart and IKEA to sell multi-brand food products as long as they are sourced and manufactured within India. Such ventures, however, must seek approval from the Foreign Investment Promotion Board (FIPB). Consequences: helping farm diversification and encourage industry to produce locally. Would help create infrastructure, revenue, and uplift farmers. Moreover, industry experts feel allowing FDI will cut waste, as big players will build back-end infrastructure. By the time products filter through various intermediaries and into the marketplace, they lose freshness and quality, and often go to waste. This will be taken care of at FDI. In multi-brand retail is allowed. With organized retail, every intermediate step, procurement, processing, transport, and delivery, adds value to the product. This happens because it uses international best practices and modern technology, ensuring maximum efficiency and minimum waste. Organized retail enables on-site processing, scientific handling, and quick transport through cold storage chains to the final consumer. Once modern retailers introduce an organized model, other vendors, including small retailers, would mechanically copy this model to improve efficiencies, boost margins, and stay in business. Organized retail would thereby bring more stability to prices, unlike the present system where hoarding and artificial shortages by profiteering intermediaries push up product prices. Competent management practices and economies of scale, joined with the acceptance of global best practices and modern technology, could immensely recover systemic competence. Like their foreign counterparts, Indian customers are entitled to receive quality products, produced, processed, and handled under a hygienic environment through professionally managed outlets. The center must consider allowing FDI in multi-brand retail of food and grocery to boost food processing, as it is unlikely to pose any threat to local stores because a majority of Indian consumers still buy fruits and veggies from the local markets. Survey findings show that a majority of Indian consumers prefer to buy fruits and vegetables from the local markets, 53.3%, and push carts 18.8%, despite presence of organized retail stores in select metros. Problems pertain despite government's initiative. Some states do not allow direct sourcing. As a result, global multinationals have not shown interest in investing in the food supply chain. High taxes on processed fruits and vegetables hinder the processing. 2. There have been significant structural changes in the export basket of India, both in terms of composition and destination. Examine with help of data. Hint: domestic value added in gross exports is an estimation of value added by an economy in producing goods and services for export, simply defined as the difference between gross output at basic prices and intermediate consumption at purchasers' prices. The measure is a percentage share of value. Value added can be decomposed into the following components: compensation of employees, gross operating surplus, mixed income, and other taxes on production less subsidies on production. Some changes than before in the trade patterns of India are: manufacturing sector has increased its share of its other tradable sectors. Specialization of production and diversification of consumption. Indian trade is gradually moving away from low value added product. Composition. The changes in India's foreign trade strategy from import substitution to export promotion have been improving exports performance significantly during the post-reform period. There has been a perceptible change in the value, composition, and direction of India's exports as a result of changes in foreign trade policy. The share of manufactured goods as well as the proportion of high value and differential products, petroleum products, has increased in India's export basket, reflecting that Indian economy is being diversified and non-traditional items of exports are gaining importance. Earlier we were exporting mainly traditional and primary commodities. India exports approximately 7,500 commodities to about 190 countries and imports around 6,000 commodities from 140 countries. India's export growth increased sharply in dollar terms in March 2017, up 28% year-on-year to $29.2 billion, the highest since March 2014. March normally sees a jump in exports, but this year's rise was extraordinarily high, a bounce of almost $7 billion over the average of GS the first 5 months of the second half of the financial year 2016 to 17. These developments in India's exports are in line with global exports. Export surge was largely due to a sharp rise in import demand of electronics and commodities from China. The composition of India's foreign trade has undergone substantial changes, particularly after the liberalization and globalization. Major exports now include manufacturing goods such as engineering goods, petroleum products, chemicals and allied products, gems and jewelries, textiles, electronic goods, etc., which constitute over 80% of our export basket. Destination. Initially, India followed the policy of import substitution, which made it dependent of Western countries. But with export promotion, India started to come out of it and started diversifying the destination of its exports. Trade data for April 2016 to January 2017 shows a big jump in exports of vehicles, parts, and accessories to Mexico, South Africa, and some South Asian countries. India's largest trading partners in descending order of value of total trade are UAE, China, Saudi Arabia, Switzerland, etc. Regionalism has become a key component of the new international order. India, as a part of its trade policy, has negotiated a number of regional and bilateral FTAs/PTAs. Exports to Asian economies like SAARC countries, Hong Kong, Indonesia, Singapore has increased over the years. India's foreign trade policy has been consistently liberalized and integrated in line with World Trade Organization (WTO) policy concerns. Though the volume and value of exports has increased manifold, India's share of the world exports is still not up to the expectation. A quick glance would show that Indian exports, which stood at $312 billion during 2011-12, dropped by 14.4% to $262 billion in 2015-16. As may be seen, Over 80% of the 5-year decline in exports is accounted for by 3 industry sectors. These are gems and jewelry, which fell by 15.1%, petroleum products which fell by 46.4%, and agricultural products which fell by 3.7%. The limited diversification of India's export basket, with the top 10 principal exports in terms of commodity groups accounting for as much as 78% of total merchandise exports. Oh, what happens in the market for these commodities has a major impact on overall export performance. In recent times, the export performance of some of these goods has either deteriorated or been characterized by a lack of dynamism. Thus, for example, 4 of India's lead exports, engineering goods, gems and jewelry, chemicals and ready-made garments, registered negative or near zero growth rates during 2015 to 16. In recent years, special circumstances have not only affected exports of some commodities, but because of the low value on average of India's export trade, allowed these special category goods to find the slot among India's principal exports for a brief period. Excessive dependence of China for iron ore exports of India affected it too. Associated concepts: what needs to be done? India is required to make its commodities and services more competitive at the world market. For increasing India's export, it is also required to add new items and diversify commodities and services at competitive price in its export basket. For this, India needs a comprehensive trade policy measure and integrated efforts. India's FDI policy and foreign trade policy must be integrated for export promotion. For achieving 2% of world trade by year 2020, India should be competitive globally and able to exploit opportunities provided by global market and environment. India needs to make proper diversification in composition of goods and services within the background of India's foreign trade policy, and also to remove bottlenecks operating in the economy and help in improving export competitiveness. India's performance on high-tech manufacturing trade front is not at par with other leading exporters of high-technology products. India should make special efforts to increase the high-technology exports such as aerospace, computers, office machine, scientific instruments, electrical machinery, pharmacy, etc. India needs to reorient the pattern of its exports to switch to more skill-intensive and more knowledge-intensive goods and services of competitive international quality. Further, diversification and addition of India's export basket and the development of new export markets should be worked out within the background of India's new foreign trade policy during post-reform period and WTO guidelines, and a wider effort to enlarge a country's foreign trade and expand commercial and economic relations with other countries. 3. The Indian economy has a peculiar feature that while the banking sector is not growing well and is affected by high NPAs, the stocks of banking firms are stable, and Indian economy hasn't faced any banking run or crisis in recent years. Examine. Hint. What is non-performing asset? When the borrower stops paying interest or principal on a loan, the lender will lose money. Such a loan is known as non-performing asset (NPA). According to RBI, an asset, including a leased asset, becomes non-performing when it ceases to generate income for the bank. Banking sector is affected by NPA. India's public sector banks, and their increasingly worrisome balance sheets, has been a subject of concern for over the last year. Economic survey pointed out that decisive resolutions of the loans, concentrated in the large companies, had eluded successive attempts at reform. Post-demonetization, this problem has continued to fester. NPAs keep on mounting while bank credit and private investment continues to fall. At its current level, India's NPA ratio is higher than any other major emerging market with the exception of Russia. Many corporates, particularly powerful conglomerates, amass huge debts owing to a combination of misfortune, miscalculation, and over-ambition. Mining ventures were hit by slumping commodity prices, and bankers' optimism on infrastructure projects turned out to be hugely optimistic in bureaucratic India. In India, despite NPA being a major problem, the recent outlook by global rating agency Moody's gave a stable outlook to the country's banking system. This is happening due to the ongoing progress on asset quality front and on better operating environment. The outlook for the banking system reflects a stable operating environment and improved prospects for asset quality, among other factors. Ongoing progress in managing legacy asset issues is offsetting the significant capital shortfalls some banks continue to face. Government support will remain strong for public sector banks. Despite the reluctance to bolster bank capital, profitability remains low but is improving. Lending margins will be stable due to a drop in funding cost concerns. However, deteriorating asset quality in agriculture and micro, small and medium-sized enterprise MSME portfolios pose risks. Way forward, the creation of a bad bank. The Economic Survey proposes the creation of PARAG, i.e., a public sector rehabilitation agency that would work out the largest and most complex cases. The associated concepts the above phenomenon was also called balance sheet syndrome with Indian characteristics. The term balance sheet syndrome with Indian characteristics was mentioned in the Mid-Year Economic Analysis 2015 by the Ministry of Finance and was elaborated in Economic Survey 2015. Here, the balance sheet syndrome refers to the worsening profit scenario and mounting losses of private sector, specifically corporate. High losses by the corporate discourages future investment, and in this way, the economy suffers. The balance sheet problem of rising debt and losses occurred in many other countries, especially in advanced countries in recent years. But in India, unlike in Japan and in the US, the problem has some unique features and hence is a balance sheet syndrome with Indian characteristics. In Japan, there was a balance sheet problem after the real estate and equity boom of the late 1980s. Similarly, in the US, there was a balance sheet problem after the global financial crisis. The Economic Survey elaborates 3 reasons to show why this syndrome is distinctively Indian. First, India is not suffering from recession or stagnation. In Japan and in the US, there is recession. Second, in India, there is no weak macroeconomic demand. Rather, there is moderately strong demand, at least relative to supply, reflected in moderately high inflation and a moderately high current account deficit. On the other hand, in advanced countries like the US and Japan, demand is poor. Third, perhaps even more distinctly, the Indian balance sheet problem is partly due to private sector investment in infrastructure via the so-called public-private partnership (PPP) model. This was because the public sector was reluctant to actively intervene in infrastructure projects. What are the reasons for balance sheet syndrome? There are 5 reasons for the balance sheet syndrome. First is weak profitability and high burden of debt for the private sector. Weak profitability and over-indebtedness discourages investment by corporate in India. Second, stalled projects and inadequate bankruptcy procedures. Third, failed PPP model has contributed to losses of the private sector. Fourth, many PSBs have financed several infrastructure projects, and stalled infrastructure projects has resulted in large volume of stressed assets in banks. Fifth, the PSBs are now not ready to give loans to the business sector, fearing penal action for managers in the context of rising NPAs. It further stalls projects by the corporate. What is painful about the balance sheet syndrome is that it discourages private investment. The balance sheet syndrome with Indian characteristics creates a web of difficult challenges that could hold back private investment. Private investment must remain the primary engine of long-run growth. The survey observes that because of this balance sheet problem, increasing capital flows will not be converted into real investment in the private sector. How to escape from the syndrome? Public investment overall is necessary to escape from the syndrome. To revive growth, public investment, especially in the railways, will have an important role to play.